Come down. Ooh, you make my high come down. Always tripping when you come around. Never have to cut you out like right now. You see, I don't have to drive me. You can say that for your mama. Maybe you should smoke some. Me try the marijuana. I was never you good. The vibe was straight. Showed you a couple of things and they feelings changed. I treated you right. Everything was a gift from a time to your bag and the color on your lip.
Welcome to the Seahawks Man to Man podcast, powered by Blue Wire. Shout out to the new company. My name is Michael-Shawn and Christopher. You guys can follow me on whatever Elon Musk is calling that app these days. My @ name has not changed. At Mike Dugar, MikeDugar. Shout out to everyone who is watching or listening via our YouTube channel. Seahawks Man to Man is the name of the channel. Make sure you like and subscribe. Even if you're not someone who indulges on that platform, it helps us quite a bit, as does following us on Instagram. Seahawks Man to Man is the name of the handle. And on TikTok, Seahawks Man to Man is the name of the handle there as well. Thank you in advance for doing that. We really appreciate it. Chris, go ahead and talk to him.
What is going on, everybody? It's your boy, Christopher Kidd. You can follow me on Twitter at CKIDD206, and that's CKid206. And yes, I echo everything Mike just said without having to re-say it. So without further ado, it's that time again. One Big Thing is back for its, fourth consecutive week? That's where, is it third?
No, you're 4.
Oh, I thought you were saying 3, and I'm like, God dang it, my math is off yet again, but I was correct. 4th consecutive week. And this week, it's a little different. The last few weeks, we've shown clips, we've talked about players, and this time I said, you know what, I want to come up with a quote. And after listening to all the press conferences, I listened to the one after the Seahawks lost to the Detroit Lions 42-29 in Detroit, and it stuck with me afterwards. And I'm thinking, okay, I wonder what he's going to say when he gets back home to Seattle. Is there anything that he's going to touch on? And he talked about the guys through all the mishaps, mistakes. They were still out there giving effort, trying, and sometimes you try hard and it just doesn't work out in your favor. For instance, one play that comes into mind is a play that Devin Witherspoon makes, I don't know, 9 times out of 10 maybe, where he is buzzing to the flat to make a tackle on a receiver, a running back, and he usually makes that big play. That's one of the things that stood out. If I'm not mistaken, when I read The Beast, there was talk about him blowing up a play in the flat. Maybe it wasn't The Beast, but I read somewhere that he had the speed in cover 2 and he just buzzed down and just laid out an offensive player. And unfortunately, against the Lions, that didn't work out so well in his favor. He ran into David Montgomery. Obviously, he's a bigger guy. Sometimes that energy meeting head on with a bigger guy versus a lighter guy, the bigger guy usually wins. And in this scenario, he did lose, but it was the fact that he didn't give up on the play. He could have easily just laid down, got laid out and been like, I'm hurt or whatever the case may be. He got up immediately. Yeah, he was stumbling, getting up, trying to catch up to him, but it was that type of effort that you saw from not just him, but from all the other defenders out there in the field, and even the offense. They were continuing to fight. They had an opportunity with 4th and 3, if I'm not mistaken, and they run one of their a really good play. It's unfortunate that Ty Lockett bumped into a defender, causing a flag for illegal screen, and in that scenario, they were continuing to fight. They were down, 27-35. So obviously, if they score a touchdown, they are right back in. And unfortunately, things didn't go their way, but you saw the fight. Geno, he was fighting. They were down 2 possessions, and he was still out there throwing the football. And even in the second half, they got the run game going. And back to the press conference that he had, maybe 2 days ago or yesterday. I don't remember. The dates are all screwed up in my head just because of the short week. But Mike Macdonald talked about the fight that this team had during that game. And I just want to play this little audio of Mike Macdonald speaking to that, because I think it's important. And when you have your head coach that notices that and believes in these guys, they see that. And that only makes this team much more dangerous. And obviously, they played against a good offense. And I think they will learn a lot from this. So here's what Mike Macdonald had to say about his team fighting through all the nonsense that was happening during that game.
Not a good enough performance on our front. Got to give Detroit a lot of credit. I thought they had a great plan offensively. I mean, they outplayed us on the defensive side of the ball for us. I will tell you this, our guys fought the heck out of that game. They went down to the last second, and that's what I'm most proud of right now, and we're going to hold on to that, and that's a foundation that we've built here that we're going to push forward.
What more could you ask for from a head coach? Obviously, he knows that there are some things that they can get better on, but he was happy that his guys didn't quit. And you can tell when a team quits. I know I hate saying that. Like, how do you know? You're not in the locker room, but you see the energy on the field. And maybe that's what it is. It's just the energy and how they're playing. And I gave that example with Devin Witherspoon. Yeah, he got ran over, but he didn't give up and just lay down and act as if, I got ran over. He got up immediately and tried to make a play. It does suck that other guys missed the opportunity to bring down David Montgomery, who I think ended up going for 40 yards after that catch. But the point is, you saw the fight from this team from the start of the game all the way to that last interception that Geno Smith threw when he was looking up in hopes to get a touchdown there. And what more could you ask for, right? I think from the standpoint of Mike Macdonald and as the head coach, that's all you want from your leaders, to go out there and acknowledge that the guys didn't give up. It's very easy to, when you're down, we're probably going to lose this game. Not saying that teams in the NFL do that, but again, body language speaks. You can tell which team is kind of, we know that it's over. It's okay. They weren't doing that. They were in it to the last possible time in the game. And I just want to acknowledge that. And that was my one big thing from their loss against the Detroit Lions. I mean, there was a couple of things that stood out, but I kind of want to switch things up. I didn't want to give you guys another breakdown of a player or anything, because I can do that on Friday when we do our standout plays from the Detroit Lions game. But I did want to give just acknowledgement to Coach Mike Macdonald, because I think he's doing a pretty good job. Team was out to a great start. They faced a better offense. And again, they had a bunch of guys that were not healthy. Byron Murphy, Leonard Williams, Boye Mafe, and of course, Uchenna Nwosu, who still is yet to play a snap. So the good news is they have a chance to right their wrongs. There's going to be a lot of young guys that are going to play yet again against the New York Giants on Sunday. So this is a learning experience, an opportunity for them to right their wrongs, so to say. And I'm excited to see what this team can do moving forward and how they can fix their mistakes.
Yeah, I think that McDonald quote, you can put that in contrast to Antonio Pierce, coach of the Las Vegas Raiders, who his team lost to the team lost to the Panthers. This is right after they had benched Bryce Young in favor of Andy Dalton. Dalton came into Vegas and smoked their boots, and then Antonio Pierce lamented after the game that his guys made business decisions out there, implying they did exactly what you were pointing out that the Seahawks did not do. They did not make business decisions, at least none that were so apparent that. And if they did, put it this way, I didn't see any, but if they did, their coach didn't call them out for it. Not just say AP was wrong per se, because that was a bad loss. But I think that you see the difference in coaching styles and how they're going about things when things go wrong. The Lions are better. The loss to the Lions is like, if you had to compare losses, that's a better loss than losing to the Panthers, the way that the Raiders did. But to your point about how guys looked and how guys handled it, how the players looked and how the coach handled it, that's a huge contrast. Guy calling out his team for making business decisions. I think he also followed it up with, and we're going to make business decisions as well. It's like threatening your guys post game, versus how that quote you hear from Mike Macdonald is like, yeah, no, we lost, but the thing his one big thing was the fight. Look at him stealing our stuff already. I see you, Mr. Macdonald. I see you, sir. It's our thing. We stole this already, so you can't steal it twice. That's not how thievery works, at least not in my book. He got to steal two big things or something like that. It can't be. Yeah, it might get a little wonky. So yeah, watch yourself, Mike. Anyway, I'm gonna go my one big thing after watching the film. I've watched the game a few times now. Wish I hadn't. There's a lot of bad stuff on there on the defensive side. But my one big thing this week is Seattle's pass coverage, specifically in an area we've seen Seattle have issues protecting in the past. And that's the middle of the field. Mike Macdonald, in addition to applauding his guys' fight, he talked about that, both on the radio and again on Wednesday when he had a press conference, that I was there for. I'd like to play the latter, the press conference. So before I dive into this particular area of their pass coverage, here is Mike Macdonald on Wednesday when he was asked to discuss the key to defending the intermediate level of the field?
With your eyes, you got to be looking at the right stuff. You got to be underneath defenders need to be able to diagnose when it's run or pass and then get to their spots. And then the deep area of the field defenders need to know when they need to attach to those routes. So any in-breaking route should be viced by a deep area defender and an underneath defender. So you should never be sold out, so to speak, unless you're in man-to-man. So that's an area we need to improve in on those second level in cuts.
I love that quote from Mike Macdonald, and one of the reasons it stuck out to me is let's see, there's a few reasons. Because they've had issues with this again in the past, not just in the past with their previous regime, but even this year. I think there was even a couple plays we showed last week from the Dolphins game that like we were noting in real time. If they had played a better quarterback, this is probably a completion. There were some of those in the Broncos game too, where if it's not rookie Bo Nix making his first ever regular season start, maybe some of these are completions, particularly to Cortland Sutton. He got free on some end breakers there. We didn't see it as much in the preseason, but we did in the regular season. But in a lot of those cases, it did not matter because either the quarterback stunk, the receiver stunk, or there was pressure on the quarterback. Right. So, and there were none of those things going for them against Detroit. The other reason is because I'm just never gonna forget. There's just some moments in my career I'm just not gonna forget covering this team. One of them is post game in Minneapolis in 2021, where they had got carved up by the Vikings, and Trey Flowers was talking to us in the concourse or like the tunnel little area outside the locker room. This is like COVID times, so the locker room itself was closed. But Trey came out, talked to us, was pretty honest. He was talking about in breakers and in cuts, and he was like, "Man, someone's gonna have to figure out what we're gonna do about that. If not, I'll figure something out." I'm paraphrasing. That wasn't the direct quote, but that was certainly the gist of the quote. Was that we got to figure out how to do something about these in breakers, and that was 2021. Trey got benched after that. Actually, after that game, I can't remember in favor of who, but he got maybe it was Sidney Jones. Got benched in favor of Sidney Jones, and then the very next week, Sidney chased an in-breaker and Daboll scored on like a 76-yard touchdown run, against the 49ers. So, and then the next week, the Rams and Stafford came here on Thursday Night Football, the game that Russ breaks his finger, I believe, and just carves them up with in-breakers, so it's not an easy thing to cover, the middle of the field there, and like you need good players at it to execute it. But we saw that particular issue, and it wasn't something I highlighted much in my coverage or even on the show here with you, Chris, because it was like they were good at so many other things, and I wanted to wait and see if they could stop Detroit from doing it, because I've been watching Jared Goff now between him playing at Cal and playing for the Rams now, and then me having to go to Detroit damn near every year. I've been watching Jared Goff play ball for like 10 years, if not longer. So I see what he's good at, and particularly in LA, he was in St. Louis, but in LA, he was good at, I don't know if he actually played for St. Louis. I might excuse me on that one, but you get the point. Jared Goff is really good at attacking the middle of the field. He has been forever. And I thought it was it's very noticeable that with all this talent, scheme change, changing the safeties out, changing the linebackers out, we're right back, Chris, it feels like in Minnesota again, 2021. Feels like we're right back in the same spot. And it doesn't stand out as much as some of those other games that the Seahawks have had issues. Another one that you guys probably remember very vividly is Brandon Ayuk in the playoff game a couple years ago, running the same route like 50 million times and gaining 50 million yards. Same thing, just come up, boom, break in, 50 yards. No linebackers to speak of. And Chris, my one big thing from watching the tape is it kind of looks similar to that. There's a play there where I'm sure Devin Witherspoon would probably argue that he got pushed off by Amon-Ra St. Brown on a big catch earlier in the game. The solo shot definitely looks like he did, but independent of the push off before he makes his in breaker is the issue from the Seahawks perspective is the linebackers are damn near at the line of scrimmage when that play happens. I think Drake Thomas was in. Yeah, I guess you could almost paraphrase my one big thing is like the Seahawks have some hook issues. It seems like, but I think it's everything. It's the corners, it's the safeties, because like Mike Macdonald said, the underneath guys got to be there too, but the top of the defense that they're keeping a lid on, those guys got to drive on those things too, read it, see it. And they didn't read or see any of that stuff well. You know, the 70-yarder to Tim Patrick was right across the middle of the field, or excuse me, to Jameson Williams for the touchdown was right across the middle of the field. That was a coverage bust, but you know, that was the type of play that they've had issues with in the past. Tim Patrick had a big one on look like a cover 3 look. They show cover 2, or they show a 2 high look, and Kobe Bryant's in the game, and he comes down at the snap, and they sent a route through the middle of the field to kind of occupy the safety. Patrick looks like he's being guarded by Trey Brown, then breaks in, and the ball gets squeezed between pretty much 4 defenders: the safety, Trey Brown, Kobe, and I believe Tyrell Dodson underneath, and it just hits. You know, and they had another one in that game as well. You know, there was a separate underneath one that went for a big game by Tim Patrick. So I watched that game. It didn't stand out in real time, but when I watched the film, I was like, ooh, Ben Johnson been studying these boys. He saw that the only passes Skylar Thompson could really complete were in the middle to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. You know, play action stuff. The first play of the game was a play action shot. I believe it's Devon A-Chain. You know, he saw some opportunities that Bo Nix missed in that first game that were covered up a little bit because of the pressure. So, and it was really noticeable for me to also hear Mike Macdonald kind of bring it up unprompted too in his radio show on Tuesday morning. I don't think the host asked about it. He got asked about it Wednesday, but you could see he's seeing the same thing that I was kind of noticing, like, yo, a good team just saw what you were putting on film and they exploited it. And I don't think it requires a good team to do it. I think it kind of just requires a good coordinator and just like a semi-experienced head coach. Like maybe if they were to play the Bears next week, I wouldn't think that like Shane and Caleb figure it out. But Brian Daboll and Daniel Jones can do that. They'll hit you with some stuff, and it don't got to be the best players in the world. They're getting carved up by Tim Patrick on a couple of these. Tim's fine, but he's like wide receiver 3 on this team. You know, Josh Allen will damn sure figure it out. We know, and this is also why this is probably my one big thing. It's because they got Kyle Shanahan coming up on the schedule next week. That brother will call 30 in-breaking routes in a row with everybody. Juice Check, Kittle, Debo, Jawan Jennings, missing somebody. Oh, Ayuk, I just mentioned. Like he just, these coaches, it's a copycat league. If you put some bad stuff on film, they will see it and they will find ways to get to it. And you would think that after a while the defense will figure that out too. But that, Chris, not being able to cover this route and stop the run, but in the pass coverage, not being able to defend that area of the field, damn near got the last staff fired. Like they just could not do it. And they were in the wrong division to have that issue. Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan, they will make your linebackers and your safeties out. They will put their lives in, make you feel like you're in hell if you can't cover that middle part of the field. Seahawks they're not as bad at it as it used to be, but Chris, there were some snaps on Monday that looked blast from the past. If you'd have told me Tanner Muse and Cody Barton were out there, I'd have been like, oh yeah, makes sense. Looked just like it. Drake Thomas, Tyrese Knight, Tyrell Dodson on some of his drops too. Safety's not driving on anything. Yeah, man, it looked all too familiar. And Mike Macdonald's not going to frame it that way because he's new here. But for us, we've been seeing this. We've been seeing Jared Goff just wreck the middle of the field. Chris, I don't think he even threw a ball outside the numbers yesterday. Maybe he did. Maybe nothing down the field. Maybe something in the flat. You know.
There were screens, but that's all. That's to your point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, screens in the flat. Like otherwise, he wasn't pushing it outside the numbers. You know, and it's because he didn't have to, and it's because of how they were playing, and that I think is worth being one big thing damn near every week. But this week it was a killer, and the one in the middle of the field to Jameson really felt like. I mean, kudos to your point about them not quitting. That felt like that could have been like the floodgates open and now they're going to lose by 4 touchdowns or something, because it just felt so deflating from the Seahawks perspective. They had grinded, I believe. They scored a touchdown and their drive took a while. It took a few plays. It was pretty methodical. And you feel like, okay, the Seahawks are back. Nope. 1 play, 70 yards, untouched, house call. That's tough, you know? So I think there's a fix for it, obviously, like Mike Macdonald was mentioning. But I do think, man, that it's a concern for me just because we've seen this happen. We know what this looks like when it don't get fixed in this division. in particular.
Mm.
You know, the Rams came in here with the puka
Tutu.
and a tutu and ran all that stuff to death. They just dressed it up a little differently, but ran it to death in the week 1 season opener, 2023. So it's not going anywhere. You're just gonna find these quarterbacks who can keep hitting you there and hitting you there and hitting you there. And until your safeties react, until your linebackers get the right depth and have the right eyes, and your corners knowing they can drive on stuff like Reek's done a few times for interceptions, it's not going nowhere. So it might be Chris might be my weekly one big thing if they don't fix it. But I really like that Mike Macdonald called it out too, because we watch all this film, and me and you will talk about stuff, and I'll talk about stuff with players or other media people. But it's nice sometimes when the coach is like, "Yeah, no, we need to fix that." Just like it confirms, when I'm watching the tape in the middle of the night, I'm like, "Oh, this looks bad," and the coach is like, "Yeah, no, this is bad." I'm like, "Whoo, thank you." Thank you, thank
Oh
you, thank you.
man.
I told Nate Tice that. I might have told him when we had him on the show too for draft stuff. But I remember telling him that in Indy, I was looking at some stuff and he'll tweet a picture of it or a video and then it'll say the same thing. And I'm like, cool. If Nate saw the same thing, then I know ball. And that was yeah. This one is tough though, because it's bad. This is a bad thing to know ball about. They are getting carved up. They got carved up in the middle, and there is potential for more teams to do it. If they don't get it right. I do, for what it's worth. I trust Mike Macdonald to get it right with the personnel he has. I don't think they need to like trade linebackers or anything. But I do think what you probably could see, Chris, to close this out before we talk to the homie Dan Duggan, is Dan, who covers the Giants. Before we talk to him, is I think that you're probably going to need to see more of those nickel and dime packages and because I think the guys who are going to be most comfortable with this, like Tyrell can look like he can get it, but it's one of those things that maybe was why he was so hard on your boy Tyrese Knight, is because teams are going to see that. They're going to see that, go to his side. So yeah, I think maybe more dime on the obvious passing situations and stuff like that to maybe get more speed on the field, get Julian Love involved. He sees that stuff really well. Me and him were talking about that a couple weeks ago. He sees those really well. Spoon's great at driving on those. Yeah, that seems like that could be one of the solutions. Linebackers still got to play their part on early downs, but in those obvious passing situations, that's maybe an adjustment to make. That's going to be huge. It's going to be huge. Everybody's got this film. Kyle Shanahan has it. That evil genius that he is. Kyle has it, Josh Allen's going to have it. Daboll is a decent play caller. He's going to have it, So, yeah, Chris, one big thing could be one bad thing. They don't figure this out pretty quickly.
Well, thanks for giving the Seahawks fans some doom and gloom, but it's understandable, especially considering the fact that you mentioned it has been a problem before, and you even dated back to having Trey Flowers. And I'm sure people are like, Trey Flowers, no, because
I also want justice for Trey Flowers, because him getting benched after that just felt so mean.
It's called being petty. You're gonna call us out for our mishaps as a coaching staff and think you're not gonna hear about it, and there's not gonna be repercussions. They probably talked to him and then benched him. That's probably how it went. And then he never said anything again. I think, too. Yeah, traded or cut. Yeah, he was.
Yeah, he got cut. He got cut and signed to the Bengals, and they made the Super Bowl that year. Actually, he was on the Bengals.
The irony in that, got cut by the Seahawks, and then we'll take you in the Super Bowl. They didn't win, but that's neither here nor there. So
yeah, so
wow,
justice for Trey, man. Justice for Trey. Nah, man. Well, I just wanted to call it like I see it. That was and if Mike Macdonald hadn't said something about it on the radio, I probably would have picked something else. But the fact that he's seeing it too, that means that's his way of saying like, yo, this is a thing. This is his one big thing in addition to his guys showing some fight. So yeah, something to pay attention to. Keep an eye on that in this game, in the Niners game. How they adjust to it, maybe it'll be in our standout plays too. Maybe not. I might go somewhere else since I've already picked that for the one big thing. So it's definitely going to be worth watching with the Giants, whether they have Malik Nabers or not. To find out more, look at that segue I just pulled off there. To find out more about whether the Giants will have their best offensive player when they come to Seattle on Sunday, we called up the homie Dan Duggan. He covers the Giants for The Athletic, does a great job, has a lot of great insight. So without further ado, which I think is how I open the next segment too, so sorry for saying that twice, here is our conversation with the homie Dan. All right, and without further ado, we're bringing in an expert on the Seahawks' next opponent. We have the homie Dan Duggan. He covers the Giants for The Athletic, does a great job. Dan, welcome to the Seahawks Man-to-Man podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. I feel like this is like an annual occurrence. These teams are always playing, so I feel like I'm kind of at home being on this podcast.
Oh man, we're happy to have you, man. We love it. We love it. Yeah, I feel like these teams are matching up quite a bit. 2022, they came in here. 2023, long trip out there to New York for Monday Night Football. Did not go well for the Giants in either scenario. Before we get to the Giants, the team, I love the work that you and the homie Zach Kiefer did at The Athletic. You guys combined for a story, like behind the scenes on the Manning cast. You on doing the Eli perspective, obviously covering the Giants, and then Zach with Peyton. I thought that was super cool, like super dope, taking us behind something we see on TV but don't get to see the inner workings of. Take us through kind of what you thought was cool or stood out from your perspective on what you were able to do with hanging out with Eli.
Yeah, no, it was really a cool thing. Like, I'm just a fan of the show, so it's like, it's kind of one of those things where you get to like do something professionally that I'm just like, I watch it on Monday nights when I'm pissed when it's not on a Monday night, So I was like, I feel like there's something to this, and I have a pretty good relationship with Eli, so I pitched it to him last year. But the challenge with Eli is he does it in his basement. Peyton's off site at a garage, like in downtown Denver. Obviously, you've read the story. Zach has a pretty good backstory on that, but. So with Eli, I was like, man, like last year we were going to do it, and it's like around Christmas time, like family in town. He's like, I think it's just too much. And so then fortunately, Zach caught wind of the idea, and he was like, well, I have a relationship with Peyton, so maybe we can tag team it. So it was just going to be me doing Eli if it was last year. It worked out so much better because Zach got a ton of access from Peyton. Obviously, I got a ton from Eli, and we were able to kind of combine forces. But I mean, it was just cool. I mean, it's just like, he could have gotten a broadcasting job. Certainly Peyton, everyone wanted Peyton, but Eli could have, been the fourth guy on CBS if he wanted to, for sure. But he didn't want to travel every Sunday to Tampa and to Chicago and bounce all around the country. He's like, I didn't have any interest in doing that at all. And all of a sudden, this thing kind of falls in their lap, after people start doing this stuff from COVID. And so now, he gets to drop his kid off at school on Monday morning, hang out with his family, all Monday night, 7:00, kind of like shuts it down and goes down to the basement. Works for 3 hours, comes back up, goes to bed, and wakes up with the kids in the morning and takes them back to school. So like that was for him kind of the dream situation. So I think it's pretty cool that they've been able to make this work. Again, I'm a fan of it, so I just enjoy it. So just kind of seeing sort of how the sausage is made. Obviously, that's what we tried to bring to readers.
Yeah, that was great. Let me plug the headline here, which I should have done in the beginning. The headline of the story, make sure you guys check that out, by Zach Kiefer and Dan. A night with the Manning cast. Voice memos, legendary cameos help redefine NFL broadcast. And to tease the lead of the story, the very first sentence is, quote, he's in charge of that right butt cheek, Eli Manning says. It shows you what type of behind-the-scenes insights you guys got. I love that. That was a great idea, great execution.
Yeah, the voice memos are crazy. I've never heard anyone who communicates that way. That's like the only way Peyton communicates. So obviously that line that in the lead is a line that Eli was watching. He talked to Saquon. They talked to people obviously leading into the game, and that was a line when he asked about how the tush push works, and Saquon told him which butt cheek he's responsible for pushing. But it's crazy. They literally do like 15-minute long voice memos where it's just like, Atlanta when they're in cover 2, they like to do this and that. Like they just break it down like that. It's really it's an interesting way to communicate. Like I said, I've never done it. Usually people get on the phone and talk. They don't have time for that, so they just speak uninterrupted and send it to their brother, and they both know what the hell the other one's talking about. You
gotta love somebody to listen to a 15-minute voice memo. Let me tell you, me and Chris, we prefer our pre-production. We can call each other. Chris sent me a 15-minute voice memo. There will be no pod. That is insane. Oh man, that was a good story. Make sure you guys check that out on The Athletic. Dan and Zach did a great job on there. Let's pivot to the Giants team you cover. Things not going well, as Giants fans are accustomed to. Pretty much another annual occurrence. It feels like outside of that 2022 season. What has gone wrong through 4 games?
Ooh, it's like, the first game was a disaster. That Minnesota game, and now granted, going into that game, no one thought Minnesota was going to be this juggernaut. So it was really concerning coming out of that game. Now at least you can maybe look back and say, all right, Minnesota's kind of done that to everybody. But that game was like, whoa, like this, Daniel Jones looked terrible. He looked totally rattled. He hasn't played like that since, which has been encouraging. He hasn't played great. They're scoring 15 points a game, so I think that's kind of stating the obvious. So I wouldn't say there's like any one drastic thing that's been the problem. If you kind of take that week 1 game out of the equation, because they went down to Washington the next week and it was 21-18. They gave up 7 field goals. They had a fiasco where their kicker got hurt on the opening kickoff, so they weren't able to kick extra points in a game where they scored 3 touchdowns, but were limited to 18 points. Then they went to Cleveland and felt like, all right, that was kind of a little bit of a bounce back. They swarmed the hell out of Deshaun Watson. Were able to squeak out a win there. And then Thursday night, it was like, Dallas was kind of ripe for the picking, and the Giants have not beaten them in forever. And it was like as good a chance as they're going to get. And they just couldn't do it. And again, you look at that game, it's not as if they got like dominated. I mean, it was obviously a close game. They even had a shot at the end. But they're just not making plays really on either side of the ball to win these games. Again, take Minnesota out of the equation. They've been, all 3 games have been 1-score games. And in the 2 losses, they just have not made the big plays when they're needed. I think with Jones, like some of his box score stats look pretty good. He's left a lot of meat on the bone, though, particularly in that Dallas game with deep passes where he's had guys open and he's underthrown them. There's a free play where he has Darius Slayton with a couple of steps on Trayvon Diggs, underthrows, it gets picked. I mean, obviously the pick doesn't count, but you might have left 6 points on the board because if Darius Slayton catches a touchdown and runs it in, that does count. So I think when you're lacking that, everything has to be perfect. They have no margin for error. And so that's where you see like a 3rd down drop by Wan'Dale Robinson. And then even that 4th down, I guess you'd call it a drop by Malik Nabers on the play he got hurt on, which is about the only negative he's had in these brilliant 4 games start to his career. It's like, again, the margin error is so thin. So if they don't make these tough contested catches, they just can't score. And that's where they need to start hitting some of the explosives, because they're not good enough to just mount 15-play drive after 15-play drive. I don't know if anybody is. And then defensively, it's been fine. I mean, I think Brian Burns said it well. Like someone kind of outlined how they played against Dallas and was like, that should be good enough to win. He's like, well, it wasn't good enough tonight. And that's just kind of how it feels. It hasn't been bad. It just hasn't been good enough. And again, I'm not surprised. I don't think they have a ton of talent on that side of the ball. But, in Cleveland, I think the defense did win in the game, and it hasn't stepped up the way they needed to against Washington or Dallas to like be the difference maker to push them over the edge.
Sticking with Daniel Jones, what are some of the challenges he could bring to the Seahawks defense? Because he still can get around the pocket and move. It's just sometimes, as you mentioned, he underthrows receivers, and that could haunt him in various ways, especially with these sticky cornerbacks the Seahawks have.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So, I mean, this will be a little bit more of a challenge. I mean, I think we remember that game, up here last year where, they, the big pick 6 there, which kind of was the nail in the coffin. And I think Witherspoon after the game as a rookie said, we knew where he was going with the ball. Like some of that stuff was like, that really lingered with Daniel Jones because obviously he got hurt, didn't play that much, but it was like, man, if rookies are kind of reading your mail, that's not a good sign. But yeah, I mean, he's been very efficient on short passes. Like his completion percentage the last couple of games has been good. He's feeding the ball to Malik Nabers endlessly, and that's not a bad strategy when the guy's been as, explosive and dynamic as he has been. But again, the deep balls he's left on the table. He hasn't gotten his legs going as much, and now I know it's like easy to say, well, he's coming back from a torn ACL, so maybe that's part of it. Although he did have 2 longish runs against Cleveland, wiped out by holding penalties. So it's not as if he's afraid to run or not able to run. It just hasn't been clicking. But that's always kind of something in his bag that he can do. But yeah, so like again, it's kind of like a boring answer about him and the team. But they're a boring 1-3. It's like nothing's been terrible. Like that Minnesota game was terrible. Take that game out, he's been fine. But it's just not good enough. And so, like, there's not something you can look at and say, oh, man, he's been terrible at this, maybe other than the deep balls, but he just hasn't made very many big dynamic plays. He's just been pretty good. It's a lot of 3rd and longs, and he's throwing to a guy, and he has to pick up, 6 yards of yak just to get the first down. Sometimes they make it, sometimes they don't. It just hasn't been a very dynamic, explosive offense.
So when Devin Witherspoon had that pick 6 last year on Monday Night Football, I didn't peep it till later, but like every camera angle of Brian Daboll was absolutely amazing. After that, I mean, as a non-Giants fan, right? Like I thought it was. He's a lot more expressive than you would think, or maybe I just enjoy looking at him very mad. I say all that to say, is he going to be okay? Like this seems like he had higher expectations for this team than what has been put on the field through 4 weeks. Like how is he dealing with this so far?
Yeah, it's a good observation because last year he was running hot. I mean, he had the game. It was the Seattle game where he like flipped the tablet back at Daniel Jones on the bench too. So I mean, obviously we were kind of analyzing everything on the sidelines last year. Where you obviously saw just his reaction to that pick 6, but he was pretty disgusted. Now this year, I think listen, it's year 3 for him. He's had one really good year, one really bad year. you start, obviously thinking about job security. I mean, he's already getting asked that question after week 2. I mean, the guy's 18 months off winning coach of the year. That kind of tells you how fast life comes at you in the NFL. But I think he has been very deliberate in putting a positive face forward. He doesn't want to be, I don't think, as emotional as he was at times last year. When he comes to the press conference, it's like he must go and do meditative breathing before he comes to the podium. Because take that Washington game back. When Washington kicks the game-winning field goal, he spikes the headset and, veins are popping off his head. By the time he comes to the press conference, it's like, hell, I thought we made some improvements, just didn't do enough to win. So he's very conscious, I think, of not sending any message of panic or anger. He's been very, praiseworthy of Jones's performance, which again, I think is really? We're paying this guy $40 million a year and you're scoring 15 a game. We're saying he's, you're so proud of how he's playing. Okay. So I think that's almost a funny part where I get why he's doing that. He probably has to be careful going too far because then you go in the locker room and go to the players and we don't want no moral victories. We're pissed off. We should have beat the Cowboys. So I don't know if that type of messaging is going to continue to resonate. But I do think he's been very deliberate in his composure. He's calling plays this year, which is not something he did the past 2 years. I think that, he can't help but let that control his emotions a bit because he can't be yelling at the headset. He's got to call, all right, we gave up a sack on first down. I got to call a 2nd and 16 play rather than chew out the OC for 25 seconds. So I think even that just logistically helps a little bit in terms of keeping his emotions in check. But yeah, I'm sure he's obviously frustrated. This is not where they want to be. He's called, he is a very good play call. If you watch the all 22, you watch these games, he's calling up plays to get big plays and they're just not executing. I'm sure that makes him want to bash his head against the wall because you only get so many of those in every game plan when they're there and you don't convert on them. Obviously, again, that's going to be very frustrating as a play caller.
Yeah, the play calling, I'm glad you brought that up because that is interesting because I did watch the all 22 as much as it pained me to do of that Cowboys game. And man, in real time, the double move that Malik put on, forget the kid's name, Booth, I think the corner from Dallas, it looks like, oh man, he routed that kid up. And then you watch all 22 and you're like, oh, this should have been a 70-yard touchdown. That should have been a dot for a score, on top of the Slayton one. There might have been another one too that he undersells there. Just to
through Slayton, but that's a great example. It's in the box score, he had a 39-yard completion. He had to fair catch that thing. He was backtracking like a 7-fielder. Because then it's funny because you can compare and contrast. Dak was a pretty similar game to Daniel Jones, but when he had his one chance to hit CeeDee Lamb, he hit him in stride. Lamb cuts back on the safety, and it's 55-yard touchdown, whereas Nabers, again, has to stop all his momentum, restart it, and he can't do that same, kind of fast twitch move against the safety. So it's it's obviously kind of cliche. It's a good game of inches. But yeah, he was guiding that throw because he was I'm not overthrowing this one. I'm not underthrowing. He's open by 20 yards. But you got to let it rip a little bit and give a guy a chance to make a big-time play rather than just, again, hey, 39 yards, nothing to sneeze at. Could have been much bigger, like you said.
So how surprising was it that they were indeed going to stick with Daniel Jones and not take a quarterback? Because I watched the HBO Hard Knocks on the Giants, and they were clearly impressed by Jaden. Yeah. And Brian Daboll, I want that kid. And then all of a sudden, Malik Nabers, and we're looking at this offense that's struggling, and you just hit on, Dak was able to hit CeeDee Lamb in stride. Meanwhile, our receiver pretty much had to fair catch it just so he didn't get murdered. But in this scenario, are you starting to realize, man, they might have made a mistake here by sticking with Daniel Jones, or do you kind of see the future and where they're trying to go and they are believing that Daniel Jones is going to get better eventually?
No, listen, I think Hard Knocks show they're done with Daniel Jones, barring him having some, amazing performance here in year 6 that we haven't seen to date. But if you go back and play that out, yeah, they would have loved Jaden Daniels. Again, Daboll said as much. They weren't getting him. You couldn't force Washington to trade back. I think the guy that really felt was more realistic to target was Drake May, because at least the Patriots, I think, were willing to listen. But at the end of the day, they weren't going to make a Godfather offer to get him, and New England wasn't that serious moving back. So, when quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3, and you're picking 6, obviously that kind of limits your options. And so then it really becomes a decision. You take that next tier. I don't think anyone's, after watching Bo Nix play yesterday, I don't think anyone in New York is lamenting them not taking him. Obviously, we haven't seen Penix. We haven't seen McCarthy. So, in years to come, we'll tell if that was the right call. But you can't go wrong when you're sitting at 6. You can force a quarterback. That's kind of what they did in 2019, and they're still kind of dealing with that. Or you can take this guy who looks like a generational talent, and whoever your quarterback is next year and for the next 10 years might be a guy who can really just take your offense to new heights. So listen, if they had their druthers, they would have taken a quarterback. but they just weren't really in position to get one of the guys they wanted. So they pivot to a guy who's, supremely talented. Now the game can knock the Nabers pick.
Nah, that makes sense. I get that 100%. And I guess now to go to Daniel Jones and Malik Nabers, hoping Malik plays because he is box office, and I think the competition between the Seahawks DBs and him would be really cool to see, just because he's physical, he catches everything, and I hope he plays. So, what challenges can Malik present to the Seahawks DBs with his route running, his catching, and just his physical stature?
Yeah, I mean, he kind of checks all the boxes. If you're looking at, what you want a wide receiver, he comes from that LSU lineage. I guess the one, it's obvious here to compare him to Odell, but he's probably a little bit more like Jamar Chase because he is a little, bigger and sturdier. But yeah, he's kind of done it all. You can throw it to him short and make guys miss or break tackles. He's a good enough route runner in the intermediate stuff. And then deep, again, we haven't really seen that enough, but I mean, there's been missed opportunities there. I mean, again, you saw the route he did against Dallas. I'm sure you saw the play against Cleveland where he literally plucked the ball off the corner's head for like a 28-yard gain. There was another play. He ran a slot fade in the second half of that game against Cleveland where he was wide open. Jones overthrew him. You're probably noticing a trend here. Opportunities. But so, I mean, he can do it. He hasn't done it as much as, it's been there to be done. But yeah, so he's supremely talented because I came on the beat in 2016. So Odell was already Odell. I didn't see him as a rookie. But this kid is as close to Odell as anyone I've covered for sure in terms of just a dynamic player. I think, again, kind of a threat on all three levels too. It's not like, oh, he's just a speed guy or he's just a possession guy. I think he can hurt a defense, in any way. And they are not shy about feeding the ball. I mean, he's setting records every week in terms of his targets and his catches and his yards. I mean, I think I looked it up earlier. He's like 38% target share. And that guy is Amon-Ra St. Brown at like 31. So, I mean, it's just insane how much they're feeding this kid. But again, at the same time, teams are going to get hip to that, obviously, and Seattle has a great secondary. So, I mean, it'll be fun to see how that matchup plays out. But yeah, I mean, I don't see them changing. Assuming he's healthy and plays, I don't see anything changing. It's going to run through him, and then it'll be up to a team like Seattle to stop that or make them go somewhere else.
Yo, I'm just now peeping. He leads the NFL in catches. I didn't even realize that.
5 catches, like it's no. Yeah, I mean, yards, he's like maybe second or third. Touchdowns, he's like second. Like it's ridiculous his production through 4 games.
Yeah, he leads the league with 35 catches, and then he is second in the NFL in yards, 386. Whoa, Nico Collins has 489. Good God, I didn't even peep that. I had a thought. Oh, you know what was interesting? It was that Vikings game was interesting to me. I'm glad. I mean, hopefully that Giants fans can realize that wasn't as bad as it seemed, because Brian Flores has made every quarterback look the way Daniel Jones looked in week 1. He made Brock Purdy look like that. He made Jordan Love look like that. He made CJ Stroud look like that. Brian Flores is just a sicko. He's the outlier defensive coordinator. You can look through any QB's game log and see, oh, which game did he play Brian Flores? You don't even have to see the Vikings logo next to it. But what was interesting about that, I'm curious on your big picture prognosis here before we get to the defense, is that both, I feel like the Giants and the Vikings were like almost a year ahead of schedule in 2022. And they both won a lot of games, both made the playoffs. I believe they both made the playoffs with negative point differentials, which kind of speaks to the overall quality of their team. They played each other in the playoffs as well, if I remember correctly. And then you get to they have their 2023 seasons, both of them kind of stink. And then they meet to begin 2024, and then the Vikings kick their ass, and the Vikings are undefeated. Now the Giants are kind of going where they are. What big picture? What's next for these guys? At 1-3, whether they win against the Seahawks or not, just how do they proceed from here, considering their quarterback situation and the state of the roster?
No, I mean, it's a great point. It's funny because that parallel is very obvious to us, but from someone you didn't notice that. It's I think. With Alec Lewis, our colleague with the Vikings, we did a story like going into last season, kind of you drawing those same parallels. You got, GM and head coach both came in at the same time. Both had unexpected success that first year. I mean, I mentioned how Daboll was coach of the year. Probably in hindsight, maybe probably could have given it to Kevin O'Connell, seeing as how he won 13 games that year and now is still cooking, in year 3. But I think the thing you look at is sort of the 2 paths you can take after that surprising success. Because now, granted, the Giants won the playoff game, but it was, down to the wire. And then they go out the next week and get destroyed by Philly. And I think they kind of, started buying into things a little too much. And, that's when you give Daniel Jones that type of extension. You start making trades for Darren Waller. You start spending a lot of money on veterans. And obviously it crashed and burned. Whereas you look at Minnesota, I think they have more of like a sober, long-term view of like, all right, Kirk Cousins, we won 13 games. This is not the long-term answer here. So, I mean, I don't know if he had a year left or they gave him a 1-year extension. You have to check me on that. But regardless, they didn't make any sort of long-term commitment. And then they had to pull the plug on him after this year, hit the reset. They do take McCarthy, who obviously, like I said, is a guy the Giants passed on. And then they go the stopgap route with Darnold, who, like, man, he looks amazing in this offense. But still, even if Darnold didn't look good, you would have some hope there if you're Minnesota because you have, your quarterback of the future. Whereas even the Giants, let's say, they're 1-3. They go out and win at Seattle. That'd be a huge win. Go out there, beat a team that's 3-1, tough place to play, and you're sitting there 2-3. You're feeling good. But yeah, what is the ceiling for this team? Like, they go 9-8 and sneak in as the 7th seed. Okay, like where's that get you? Because we saw in 2022 where it got them making a bad decision to commit to Jones long term. And if he goes 9-8 and makes the playoffs, he's going to be back next year. There's no way ownership is going to let them move on, which is what they need to do. They need to finally rip the Band-Aid off. So I think, honestly, the best case scenario, maybe not for Brian Daboll's job security, is for them to just bottom out, get a top 3 pick, not be in the position they were this year where they won a couple of games last year that knocked them out of, Jaden Daniels, Drake May range, and just get the quarterback and start over. But the problem is now you're talking year 4 of this regime starting over. Like now there's some pieces. There's Brian Burns. There's Malik Nabers. There's Dexter Lawrence. There's some pieces, but like it's a little late to be kind of like breaking ground on like the biggest piece of that. And so I think that's the thing where Minnesota had a better approach where they made the tough call on the quarterback. Now, again, it's different. Kirk's older. He's come off an injury. But still, they started pivoting towards their future where I think the Giants were still trying to cling on to like some kind of false hope from that 2022 season. And I think they're still kind of digging out from that. So this year, I think they're going to be around a 6 or a 7 win team. That kind of leaves you in no man's land. You'll be picking 8th and what quarterback can be available there. So I don't know like what the long-term outlook looks like here. It's not clear and it's not very rosy. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of navigate. Cause I think they kind of got off course and it's hard for me to see how they get back on it, quickly at least.
It's funny. It's weird to say. This is going to sound crazy, but it makes sense considering the context. It's like when winning too much goes wrong. It really is. They like won too many games.
No, I mean, that's 100% true. They came in, trust me, if you gave them truth there, they wanted to win 3 games in 2022 so they could blow it up and draft CJ Stroud or Anthony Richardson or whoever and just run the Josh Allen blueprint. Instead, yeah, you win 9 games. That's awesome, but it just didn't get them anywhere. And now they took a step back in year 2. So everything's just framed kind of upside down. And it's, the arrow is not going up. It's anything that's going down. So yeah, they got themselves in a sticky spot. Like you said, they won too much. And trust me, if they could do it over again and just could pick a record for 2022, it would have been 3 wins. Give me CJ Stroud. And then, they'd be feeling a lot better about things, I'm sure, where they are today.
Man, it's funny how the NFL works like that, man. It's hilarious. You win too much sometimes. It can set you back. It's kind of crazy.
You mentioned a couple of players, and that would be Brian Burns, who you guys went out and got, Dexter Lawrence, who is, I think he's box office, and then Kayvon Thibodeau, who hasn't really figured it out all the way through yet. And I guess the Giants are like, hey, man, we need you to pop, man. You are talented. We need it. How is this defensive line not as good as it should be based on just some of the names I mentioned?
Yeah, well, listen, I mean, that was the bet they made. And it was again, Hard Knocks is funny because it gave us insight to stuff that we might have thought or you might have heard. But we got to see it. And there was a scene even there where Joe Shane is at the combine. He's telling the DC Shane Bowen, like, hey, we can get Brian Burns. He's explaining the cost of it. He's like, I might have to play corner. And it's like, that's kind of where they're at. But the problem, the thought process was it doesn't matter if I'm playing corner because we have such a dominant pass rush, and that has not come to fruition. And now Dexter Lawrence, I mean, with Aaron Donald retired, he might be the best interior defensive lineman in the league. I'm sure Chris Jones or, there's other guys have arguments, but he's certainly in that discussion. But teams just double him every play. And then the thought process, and he still makes an impact. The thought process was, okay, well, you can't double him and double the edges, but like teams kind of have, or they'll leave Kayvon, one-on-one, and he got the best of the rookie tackle in Dallas on Thursday night. That was Kayvon's best game against Dallas, but otherwise he's been pretty quiet, and that's kind of been the book on him where he'll feast on some bad tackles, and then he'll be quiet for 2 or 3 games, and then he'll get 2 sacks and pop up, and he just has not been the force you were hoping for when you take him number 5 in the draft. I mean, you look at the guy from his draft class. Now, granted, another guy the Giants couldn't have had, but Aiden Hutchinson went a few picks before. That's the type of player you want to see in year 3, and just Kayvon has not been that consistently disruptive force that Hutchinson has been. And then Burns, it's like he is who he is. Like they can't say like there's any like misconceptions. He's been in the league for a long time. He's a super athlete. He's a really good player. He's not a great player. Like, he's always been a good player on bad teams. He comes here, and that's kind of what he looks like. I know it's 4 games. They gave up a lot to get him. He's getting paid in that Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, that upper Bosa, that upper echelon of edge rushers. He has not played at the same level as those guys. So you're making a bet that, he's still young. He's going to get there when we put him around this other talent. He gave up a 2nd-round pick that could have been used on a corner, gave up a 5th-round pick. And I mean, he's a good player. Like, he's not like been a bum, but like, there just hasn't been a big impact. And that's what you need. Especially if you're a rebuilding team, you're going to give up these draft picks, give up all this money. He needs to come in and be like a transformational piece of the defense. And he just hasn't been that. He played really well against Cleveland, had a big game-changing strip sack late in that first half to set up a touchdown. So he's had that moment. But it's, again, like, he was super quiet against Dallas, and that's just kind of who he's been throughout his career. So he might go off against Seattle because, again, he has the talent, and he's, and he's a hard worker. It's nothing like that. He just kind of a little streaky, and I think you just need more from him. And I just don't know you're going to get it because this is kind of who he's been for 5 years.
So would you put your money on Kayvon and Brian Burns having a better week, considering the Seahawks are week 5? They're still trying to figure out their offensive line. Thank God Geno's throwing the ball, because I don't know if anyone else could come in here and do the things he's been able to do with the inconsistency with the offensive line.
Well, Cross has been pretty good at left tackle, though, right?
Yeah, he's been okay, I would say. Obviously he got beat up by Hutchinson a few times, but that's Hutchinson, and Mike has talked about that a couple of times, where if I gotta look up a dude that just beat you, like number 97, who the hell is that? That's where it becomes a problem. And he hasn't had too many of that. Okay. He's just been beat by guys that are some dogs, and Hutchinson is one of them. But now he's going to go up against potential 2. And Kayvon, you mentioned that against the Cowboys, he was beating on a young guy. Well, Stone Forsythe for the Seahawks, young guy, but he did step up yet again against Hutchinson. So I'm thinking this could be an interesting matchup as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think obviously, the right tackle situation seems like something they could exploit. But yeah, they just have not. The Cleveland game was the outlier where they did take over the pass rush. They actually blitzed a ton in that game, which is not something Shane Bowen likes to do. He kind of like must have found a page from Wink Martindale's playbook, like laying around the coach's office, and he broke that out for that game, and it was very effective. But that offensive line was super beat up, and Deshaun Watson, he was very shaky in the pocket. I don't know if you want to do that against Geno and these receivers. I don't know if blitzing is the answer, but again, that's not the blueprint. The blueprint was we're going to rush with 4 and we're going to overwhelm, bad tackles or mediocre tackles. They haven't done that consistently. So, again, maybe this is a game where they can do that. Again, I think, so much attention is going to be focused on Dexter Lawrence. I assume every team facing the Giants, that's where their game plan starts. So there should be opportunities for the guys on the edge to have some one-on-ones. I don't know, like if you say Kayvon Thibodeau against Charles Cross, they're mostly both guys in that same draft class, that might be a draw. So put Burns on the other side, and hopefully he beats up on, the backup right tackle, because they haven't gotten that consistently enough, but you would think he would have an advantage in that matchup.
Yeah, there's like a debate. I wouldn't just attribute it to the nerds. I feel like real football people have it too. Like, what matters more, the pass rush or the coverage? Like, and the Giants were like, let's push that to the extreme. Let's just put Deontay. Is it Dante or Deontay? I think it's Deontay, right? Yeah, let's put Deontay Banks and some dudes out there and just try to have the best pass rush ever and see what happens. And I bet you every OC is like, well, we'll figure that out pretty fast, buddy. Fade balls to number 3 being Banks. Poor guy. He didn't sign up for that. The fascinating philosophy there from the GM. I don't agree or disagree, but he seems to have pushed that debate to the extreme, and what some people would call a predictable outcome has emerged there. The ball has to get out eventually. Right. You need guys who can make a play on it. I do like the safety though, Nubin from Minnesota. All right, let's we set the table a little bit. Daniel Jones not very good. Malik Nabers is great if he plays. He's in concussion protocol now. If he plays, that'll be great for the Giants. The defense has a really good front, and they have the 3 of us and Deontay Banks out there playing in the secondary. So with all of that said, the table is set. It's time for a prediction from Dan. Or do we want to do over under first, Chris? How do we want to do it to get us out of here?
You might as well go ahead and do the prediction.
All right, cool. So do we have a line? What's the line on this game?
I believe it's Seahawks -6.
Oh boy, Vegas just has no respect. No respect for the G-men.
I will double check. Set it up, Mike.
Let's go with that. Let's go with that until we get an official number on that. So Dan,
-6,
what is
yeah.
What is your official Seahawks man-to-man opposing beat writer game day prediction? Seahawks Giants. Giants are getting 6 points on the road.
I would probably go with Seahawks like 27-17. I think they got a little too much firepower for the Giants, and I documented pretty extensively here. I don't think the Giants have enough firepower to match them score for score. So I would think it's be a game of Seattle controls pretty comfortably, which again feels like how these last couple matchups have been. So I don't expect anything drastically different this go around.
All right. I should have said this beforehand. Colton Pounty was our guest on the last podcast. He predicted incorrectly that the Seahawks would win. So everyone go bug Colton and blame him for that. But for jinxing the Seahawks there, Dan is taking the Seahawks to win and cover the spread. Beat writers have been even against the spread so far. All right, last thing. Over under. Let's go with, I love Danny Dimes in the nickname, man. It's just great. Over under, Danny Dimes passing yards. 219.5. Let's go with that. What you got? Over or under? I tried to make this as tough as I could.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably around what he's been at this year. I don't have that number on the top of my head, but he had a decent amount of yards against the Cowboys. Again, if I think they're going to be losing, they'll probably be throwing. I'm still going to go under. I'm showing some respect to that Seattle secondary, and I think they'll, I don't think you can take Malik Nabers away, but I do think they'll probably be able to limit him to an extent. So yeah, I think it's going to be tough sledding. I think it's going to be like, he'll be in the high 100s or something like that. I don't think he's going out there and dicing them up and throwing for 220 is not that's even a lot, but I don't see. I'm going to hedge against him having a big passing game, so I'll go under.
As long as the run game isn't there, should be okay.
Yeah, that is not a lot. We started the show with a peek behind the curtain with the Manning cast. We'll peek behind the curtain for our own show. We were recording this on Tuesday. I just got home from Detroit. Dan said he's giving respect to the Seahawks DBs. He might be the only one doing that on Tuesday right now, because right now they are getting killed for getting lit up by Jared Goff and the Lions. So kudos to Dan.
A little better
in them.
In Detroit, though, I'll say, right? I mean, yeah, maybe I'm talking crazy here, but like it hasn't been that bad before that game, right? Like it's been. I know they played bad offenses too, but yeah, that being fresh in mind, maybe I want to rethink that. But no, I'm going to say that Detroit, they got a pretty nasty offense. I'm going to say that the Giants are not going to be able to replicate that.
No, yeah, you're right, Dan. Jared Goff didn't have an incompletion. That has literally never happened. So no, it has not been that bad ever. So respect your prediction. Chris has written it down. You are held to it only on this podcast. You make other predictions everywhere, you're fine. You won't hear from us. But on this show, that is your prediction set in stone in our Google Doc. Before we get you out of here, Dan, do you have anything you want to plug? Any stories coming up? Socials, podcasts, anything? The floor is yours.
Yeah, no, just, I'm on Twitter, DDuggan21. So if your fans want to follow along for this week to get the other side of the perspective, and obviously my work's on The Athletic, but now the Manning story, I'm taking a blow from anything too crazy. That took a lot of time and energy early in the season. So I don't have anything too crazy in the hopper. So yeah, just a standard coverage this week. But yeah, maybe fun. A lot of Giants Seahawks kind of revenge games or whatever you want to call it going on this week. So it'll be fun to
Julian Love, that's right.
And Love, Leonard Williams. You can't forget Geno Smith's short tenure in New York with the Giants. So yeah, no, it'll be a lot of storylines. Mike Kafka, once upon a time, Seahawks head coaching interview. They want him for the OC job. That might be more of a story for us. It seems like things worked out all right offensively for the Seahawks. But yeah, so it's fun. It should be a fun week. And yeah, so just follow along for the other side with me if you want.
Well, there you
guys
it,
follow Dan, man. Thank you, Dan, for joining us, man. We really appreciate it. Thank you guys for tuning in to the Seahawks Man to Man podcast. Make sure you follow us on Instagram, Seahawks Man to Man, TikTok, Seahawks Man to Man, YouTube, Seahawks Man to Man. We keep all the channels and the handles consistent for y'all. It's really easy. It's all the same damn thing. All right. We will catch you guys later this week, our YouTube only show. Until then, see you guys.